you also kind of led right into our next slide here, which is let's talk about some of these players within Smarketing field. And so obviously one side of this is going to be the sales department. And I've pictured here, Phil, that sales, kind of to your point, sales has been the core operation for businesses for, as long as I can remember. They consider themselves a revenue stream. They are a revenue stream. And to your point, they do things just because that's the way things have been done, or in your case, maybe because they don't even know why it's being done. It's just being done.
People get into habits. We all like to think that we're good enough that we can do things on the fly. The reality is we'll do things that will work once, and we think that is always going to work, and so we'll get into those habits. And it's only until much later do we find out that that habit really wasn't the most effective. There's been an enormous change in the sales world over the last 15 years. The advent and now the widespread use of the internet by potential buyers has radically changed the way people buy. And as a result, some people who, as you've pictured here, tend to be a little more old school in their selling approaches are really being left behind. It doesn't mean they're not selling, but what I believe it means is they're not selling as effectively as they could. And to say that we do it this way because it's the way it's always been done, that's simply not good enough. What we like to see, and what I especially like to see when I'm working with a company, is I want them to have a mindset where they believe they can improve all the time. Call it a Six Sigma or a Kaizen, or call it a continuous improvement mindset. But we've always got to be evaluating what we're doing and identifying what we can improve. And when we do that, then we make those even little changes on a continuous basis that lead us to better performance. But you're right, I run into this quite a lot. This is the way we sell because it's the way things have always been done.
Absolutely. And I hope for those of you guys looking at this slide, I did not represent sales in a negative way. I was trying to take what I feel is often the misperception of them. And so we all know sales is always saying that marketing leads suck. And not everybody does that, but it's kind of the common, one of the things that really starts this fight between the two departments and is causing kind of the chasm. And so I just wanted to represent a few of those. I know you have a couple thoughts on that.
Well, if I could, I'm going to tell you, in my career, I've found that whether I've been in the field selling or whether I've been working with companies and helping their sales reps to perform better, that in my experience, the salespeople who complain most about the leads they're getting from marketing are the ones who get the most leads from marketing. In other words, they get so many leads, they become so accustomed to being fed those leads that they become very picky, and they really begin to take those leads for granted. I've been in sales roles where I got 0 leads. And when I got 1 or 2 from time to time down the road, for example, I told you when I started my career as a stockbroker, I was young, I was inexperienced. I got no leads from my company. The more experienced brokers got the leads.
Yeah.
And when I got to the point where I was good enough where I could get some leads from my manager as they came in, I was so grateful for those. I didn't care how good they were. Now, I'm not suggesting that all leads are good, but again, what I find is that those salespeople who typically haven't gotten leads in the past, when they start getting leads, they really work them hard. They treat every lead as valuable as it really is. They understand the effort that went into generating that lead, and they're grateful for that. It's those sales reps, especially we'll see on an inbound sales floor, like some of the companies that you and I know about. Those sales reps are very, very discriminating, and they're very, very ungrateful after a time because they get so accustomed to having that free flow of leads coming in that they no longer realize the amount of time, effort, and really thought that goes into generating really nicely qualified leads.
Absolutely. And I can say in my own experience, I've run a sales force of over 100 outbound, basically a call center, and I was the marketing manager of that and also the lead generation end of it. And what I found was every time I did get a good lead, I went to the most appreciative person. Regardless if they were the most qualified, it was because they really would work it. I could guarantee that they'd follow up with it. And the other part that I think we'll get into this is that they'd give me feedback about it. It was so hard for me to adapt or change what I was doing marketing to get a better lead when I didn't hear from sales how it went. It just kind of went into the endless chasm of sales calls and whatnot, and maybe other customers or clients that we got, but I never heard back, and I couldn't develop an ROI based off of it because the sales guy wouldn't report how it went.
Exactly. I think most salespeople, if you're listening, need to understand that a lead that's generated by your company, on average, is at least twice as likely to close as a cold call. and in many cases, many times more likely to close. And so the biggest mistake that you can make as a sales rep is if you simply don't follow up on that lead. When that lead is generated, you've got to follow up on it quickly. They have a very brief shelf life before they lose their interest, and they'll simply move on to the next company that does follow up with them quickly.
Exactly. There's many stats on that it needs to be within 1 to 2 minutes that you're following up to have the absolute best success. And
absolutely.
We'll talk about some of the systems later on and how you can make that happen. So last thing here is sales guys are normally concerned with sales qualified leads, often judged on sales qualified leads as well. So kind of what the metric that they care most about. We'll move more into our next player, and that's the marketing department, and maybe the hipster of the business world. They're always trying to do something funky. You're not sure what they're doing. I've heard it can be creepy. I hear it's weird. Whatever it is, it's not sales. You're not the one, in the trenches doing the work. But I think marketing obviously has a great role to play. And so just a few of the things where marketing might tell you to work smarter, not harder. Marketers can send 100,000 emails in a matter of minutes, whereas a sales guy can only make so many calls so quickly. And so they kind of see themselves as a quantity play, a branding play, a reach play. And while that might be possible, the balance between sales and having the relationship and that direct communication, which I think we're seeing consumers desire more now than even in the past 2 decades or so. Lastly, just marketing is not a revenue stream, which I know for somebody like myself just cuts me to my core. I feel like I'm definitely bringing money into the organization, and that might be one of the things we look at next as we talk about how the C-suite can get involved and how the whole organization can.
Well, and you're right that typically in an old school framework, the sales guys say, we're the ones who generate the revenue, you guys do something else. I think if we're really clear in a Smarketing context in terms of attribution, understanding where that lead was generated, what path it followed before it did get to the sales rep, then again, we don't necessarily say to the sales rep, well, you didn't do much in closing this, but we can say that marketing had this much role in generating that lead, nurturing that lead, and then getting that lead to the point where when the sales rep got it, it was that much more ready to buy.
And you mentioned attribution. I wonder if you could even go a little deeper into that, because I know a lot of the people that will be listening to this webinar are in marketing, and probably hurts them the way that it hurts me. How would you advise marketers to respond to that or not get discouraged by it?
Well, first of all, you've got to know your numbers. You've got to measure and measure and measure some more, whether you're in sales or marketing. You have to know, for example, to the extent possible, where was this prospect and how was this prospect first contacted, or how did they first contact us? Were they an inbound lead on the website who opted in the sense of they downloaded a white paper? In other words, they were just kicking tires at that point. Were they an inbound lead that was more sales qualified? They were raising their hand and saying, please contact me right away, I have a need. All those things become very important in identifying the path that that lead took before it reached a salesperson's desk or their CRM. And as salespeople, we also have to be very honest. Wow, was this a cold call that I made and I had no help whatsoever from anybody else in the organization? Or was this something that had some touches from our marketing team? Again, were they thrown over the wall because they had come to the website, said, talk to me right away, and I was immediately pinged and therefore I made the call back? Again, attribution is knowing where it was generated, how it was generated, the path that it took before it got to me as a sales rep. And then really being honest across both departments, sales and marketing, about what was the path that lead took before it got to where it was. It doesn't diminish the role of the salesperson to admit that he got a really well-qualified lead.
Yeah, and maybe it's a lunch or something.
Maybe it is.
And you get more of them. So often, the thing that marketing is going to say about sales is that sales never follows up on leads. I think we've briefly addressed that.
Well, in fact, that's true. Some studies done indicate that between 47 and 53% of leads are never contacted. And so this is an area where salespeople can make some significant improvement.
Absolutely. And I can tell you right now, we are running campaigns for a number of clients based on leads that they were not able to follow up with. And before we just went into the campaign, we talked a little bit higher level strategy of how are you actually going to fix that prior to just going back and asking them for another demo request or whatever it might be.
So what were the numbers that you saw in terms of not followed up?
It was higher than that.
Higher than 50%.
Higher, well higher. So we were well over 75%.
That's unfortunate.
Yep. And you know, it is unfortunate. In some cases, it's also based on the business model, and sometimes, you know, you're successful and you don't actually have the infrastructure to go after all of that, and so, you know, success can also be a hindrance in a way. If you rush too quickly to market, or in just some cases, you know, somebody plugs you the right way, and all of a sudden you're getting more than you were set up to handle. And so I think that there are more than one reason why people aren't following up with leads, but you need to figure out what that is for you guys and plug the hole. Lastly, marketing's obviously goal is usually to be generating a marketing qualified lead that they can then send over to sales, and kind of one of the metric that they're most often compared against. And the last player in this that doesn't fall into the Smarketing acronym is the C-suite. And in my opinion, Chuck, this is by far the most important group, because these are the ones who can influence sales and marketing. This is mom and dad to me. If the kids aren't getting along, you need somebody to sit on top of it and say, you guys need to figure out how to get along. And this, for me, is the group that is not playing in this field as much as I wish they were in a lot of cases. They often say how things will be done, which means you really can make sales and marketing get along based on an edict, in a way. You know, one of the misconceptions or the thoughts of sales and marketing I hear a lot are that C-suite doesn't really know what's going on. I would think that they know better than we do, but that's kind of how you know, we justify some of the things that we want to do, and then if we get a no, it's because you don't really know what's going on. But also, C-suite is predominantly known to come down hardest on sales guys. You know, those are the ones who will get the axe, and often seem to be the most stressed in the office when times are not going quite as well. But on the other side, marketing budget is often the first to go as well. So I don't know what your experience has been with C-suite, or how you think this plays into this marketing world.
Well, I believe it's critically important. We won't even work with a company where the ownership or the highest level leadership isn't completely bought in. Because, as you indicate here, first of all, very few things will get done if people below that level of decision making know that the top level decision makers aren't bought in. The second thing is this idea when someone says they don't really know what's going on. That's a lack of accountability, and that's simply poor leadership. Working with a company in the Northeast out of the Boston area, I was on a trip back there about a year and a half ago, and one of the first questions I asked their leadership was, how frequently do you interact with the sales team? And I heard crickets for just a moment. And the response, the kind of hesitant response was, well, we kind of leave those guys alone. I'm sure that this leadership team would also have said that about their marketing department. Mm-hmm. We kind of leave those guys alone. These are leaders who are not engaged. These are leaders who are not holding themselves accountable for performance in those departments. And they're not holding those departments accountable. And as a result, they were getting some really big disconnects. And so, again, whenever I hear someone who says they don't really know what's going on, they don't communicate with their sales or their marketing teams, that's poor leadership. They've got to be bought into the idea that part of their responsibility as leaders is to have regular accountability with those teams so that they do know what's going on. Those teams, they'll perform really well when they know that the people they report to care enough to hold them accountable. And whether it's simple little pings that we might do day in and day out, or whether it's a monthly marketing meeting, monthly sales meeting, whatever it might be. And that leadership needs to get in there and roll up their sleeves and know enough about those functions that they can know to ask the right questions.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree about knowing about it, and I think we talk a little bit more about that even later on, but just actually having a working knowledge of really what's going on, I found has been the best leaders I've ever had to work for. Lastly, the C-suite's most generally concerned about the revenue. You always hear about the bottom line, and so we wanted to point some of those different metrics that we are held to, because they're different. Most departments, have all three of them, they really do, but are they really being held accountable to all of them? And just the fact that they're, by definition, different, almost, to me, presents this gap.
I agree, and I think, pardon me, one of the big mistakes that a lot of companies will make is they only use that one metric, revenue.
Right.
they don't take a look at all of the activities and all of the successes and all of the things that go into revenue. Revenue, unfortunately, it's a lagging indicator. It tells you what happened in the past. But certainly we do want to measure revenue. That's what we tell the winners and losers in business. But at the same time, we want to measure all the things that go into generating that revenue. Whether it's on the marketing side, we know that great campaigns yield super results, a lot of conversions, opt-ins, etc. They generate the leads that then our sales teams can close at a higher rate. We can measure all those things. And then on the sales team, again, the number of closes and the revenue generated, it's a lagging indicator. And there are a lot of other things that precede that we can measure. And great leadership in the C-suite understands those things and asks their marketing and sales departments to measure those things as well. So that even if we see a little bit of a downturn temporarily, we can understand why that happens and what we can be doing to prevent that from happening in the future. And so, this idea of marketing budget's the first to go, I think some of that also rests on the marketing department. When they're not measuring and they're not showing top-level leadership exactly the value they bring and the role they're playing in the sales success, then we see some disconnects there. And that's when leaders who don't know will say, well, let's cut the marketing budget. Yep. That's a little bit like saying, let's cut off one of our arms when we've got a heavy load to lift.
Yep. Again, Chuck, love having you. You make me happy in a lot of the things you say, because really you make such good points where the marketing group, and I've been a marketing manager, a marketing director for many companies, and I've found when I was unsuccessful, it really actually came back to me. And I wanted to say, oh, they don't understand, they don't really know what's going on. But it was for me to show the small wins and to be the one informing the group. And so I don't think that you can just say, oh, they don't get marketing. It is your job to tell them. And you'll be happier and less stressful in your role if you do a good job of that. And this isn't teaching them to get certified in analytics. It's very base, important things. If you think of the executive summary that you need to provide them, what are the very most important things that are going to resonate? And then can you explain how the activities that you do are actually being trafficked, or how they integrate with the larger corporate philosophies? And
in the context of Smarketing, the better job that we do in the marketing and in the sales areas of demonstrating for the top level leadership the activities that lead to results and outcomes, because that's what they want. They want results. Mm-hmm. If we demonstrate the activities that lead to that, then we get more clarity and better buy-in.